Welcome back to Fueling Nightmares, where we usually dive into the shadows that wait for you in the dark, but today we are extinguishing the lights on the most wonderful time of the year. There is a specific kind of darkness that only exists around Christmas, a contrast between the warmth of the hearth and the freezing, indifferent void waiting just outside your window. And I'm not talking about the cozy, commercialized scares you see in Hollywood movies where everything wraps up with a bow. I'm talking about the stories that stain the holidays, the kind that make the silence of a snow-covered forest feel less like a wonderland and more like a graveyard waiting to be filled. If you are the type of person who finds comfort in the macabre while everyone else is singing carols, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and lock your doors, because we are about to head into the deep freeze with a collection of Christmas horror stories that will make you think twice before you look out into the snow tonight. Let's start with a trip to the deep woods of Kentucky, where the silence is heavy enough to crush you. My cousin Lai and I had rented a secluded cabin way out near Pine Hollow for Christmas week. That kind of cold stays with you, a deep freeze that settles in the soul, not unlike the chill that descended over my family the year we spent Christmas at my Uncle Nate's place, a crumbling estate in a little nowhere town near the Kentucky-West Virginia line, where the coal dust seems to stain the sky permanently gray. We arrived a couple of days before Christmas, the drive winding through hollows that felt forgotten by God. Uncle Nate was retired military, a man made of gristle and silence who lived alone and didn't talk much unless he was 3 beers deep, and even then it was mostly about the weather or the rot in the floorboards. On Christmas Eve, the air thick with impending snow, he came in from the garage holding a sagging cardboard box that smelled of mildew. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, the tape yellow and peeling. Cape rations, it said in faded permanent marker. He shoved it into my chest and said, "Set up the manger out by the woods." I blinked. Same spot as always. I paused, looking out the back window at the encroaching darkness. Out by the woods, he just nodded, staring past me like that explained everything. Apparently it was some obscure tradition they had when my mom was a kid, a ritual whose origins were lost to time. Setting up the nativity not by the house, not on the porch where people could see it, but all the way out at the edge of the trees behind the clearing, a boundary marker. Why? No one said. Just that's how it's done. So, I took the box, pulled on my heavy boots, and trudged through the snow. It had that powdery, dry texture that gets everywhere, squeaking underfoot. The clearing was maybe 30 or 40 yards out from the back door, past the stone fire pit, down a slight slope, right where the manicured backyard gave up and the wild, tangled tree line took over. The box was full of old plastic figures, hollow and light, all of them scratched, faded, or missing parts from years of neglect. Mary's eyes were rubbed off, leaving her with a blank, terrifying stare. Joseph looked melted on one side, like he'd been too close to a fire. The baby Jesus had a jagged crack down the middle of his face, and one of the wise men had no head, just a jagged plastic stump. And then there was the angel, small, dingy, missing one wing. Its face was worn almost smooth by the elements, but its arms were outstretched, not in prayer, but like it was offering something or waiting to be picked up. I found the spot, a makeshift platform made from a rotting plank resting on 2 cinder blocks, and arranged the scene as best I could. Animals, people, baby in the middle, angel in the back watching over them. The whole thing looked pathetic, like it had barely survived a garage sale in hell. I adjusted it a few times, trying to get it to stop tilting on the uneven ground, but eventually I gave up. My fingers were stiff, numb inside my gloves, and I couldn't feel my nose anymore. Later that night, sometime after 11,000 p.m., the power went out. No flickering, no brownout, no warning, just one soft, mechanical click, and the house went pitch black. Uncle Nate didn't even blink or curse. He grabbed a kerosene lantern from the hall closet like it was routine, like he was expecting it. "Happens when the wind's up," he mumbled, though the trees outside were still. Then he went to bed, leaving me in the gloom. My parents had already turned in, tucked away in the guest room with the door closed tight. I stayed up in the den, sitting cross-legged by the dying fireplace, picking at cold sugar cookies and trying to read by the firelight. The flames were low, casting weird, stretching shadows on the walls that looked like grasping hands. I didn't really want to sleep yet. The house felt too awake. Around midnight, I started hearing bells, not loud ones, not the cheerful jingle of sleigh bells. These were small, high-pitched, with a thin, dissonant metallic ring to them, like chimes made from rusted spoons or pieces of scrap wire hitting each other. They came from the woods. At first, I told myself it was just ice falling from branches or maybe some wind knocking wind chimes on a neighbor's porch miles away, but it wasn't random. It had a rhythm, a deliberate cadence, 3 chimes, then silence, 3 more, then silence, over and over, ting, 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 pause, ting, ting, ting. I stood up, walked to the back door, and peered out. The snow was bright enough under the full moonlight to see the clearing in grayscale. The manger scene was still there, a small dark blot against the white, but it looked different. The angel was missing. Everything else was still in place, more or less, but the angel wasn't standing in the back anymore. I figured maybe the wind knocked it over, or it fell behind the blocks. The wind had picked up earlier, so I grabbed my heavy coat, boots, and a heavy-duty flashlight and stepped outside. The cold hit harder than before, a physical assault that sank into your bones, bypassing the skin entirely. I followed the footprints I'd made earlier, stepping in my own tracks to save effort. They were already starting to soften around the edges, filling with drift, but still visible. About halfway across the clearing, the beam of my flashlight caught something strange. There were new tracks in the snow, not mine, smaller, deeper, rounder. Whatever made them wasn't wearing shoes. They were too round, too devoid of tread marks. They looped around the nativity setup, fast and erratic, indistinguishable chaotic circles. Like someone, a child maybe, had run tight, frantic circles around it again and again in a frenzy. Then I saw the angel. It had been moved. It wasn't on the ground. It was in the trees, not far in, just past the edge of the light. Someone or something had placed it carefully on a moss-covered rock, sitting upright, facing the house. Its broken wing was angled slightly forward, like a pointing finger. I just stood there, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. No more bells, no wind, no sound at all, except my own jagged breathing, which suddenly felt way too loud in the stillness. I didn't go closer. Every instinct screamed, turn around. I walked back to the house without looking behind me, fighting the urge to run. I lay awake on the couch, the lantern burning low beside me, listening for any sound, bells, footsteps, the creak of the porch. Nothing came, but the anticipation was torture. Christmas morning, everything was normal again, too normal, like the house was pretending nothing happened. Pancakes, coffee, wrapping paper being torn, fake smiles. I asked Uncle Nate casually about the nativity setup, hoping he'd say he moved it, hoping for a logical explanation. He just said, "That's how we do it," and went back to his black coffee, his eyes hard. I didn't bring up the angel. That evening, just before dinner, the power went out again. Click, darkness. This time, I didn't light anything. I just stood in the dark for a second, letting my eyes adjust, then walked to the back window. The scene out there had changed. Joseph was knocked over face first. The donkey was lying on its side in the snow. The angel was gone again. I didn't even consider going outside this time. I sat on the floor by the cold fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, listening. Just after midnight, the bells came back. 3 chimes, a pause, 3 more, then footsteps, not inside. On the porch, the wooden planks groaned under weight, not heavy boot steps. These were soft, deliberate pads of feet pressing down just enough to creep the wood. They moved slowly, tauntingly, then they stopped right in front of the door. I looked toward the glass panel. It was frosted over with intricate ice patterns, but I could see a silhouette through it, thin, asymmetrical. Still, then the doorknob started to turn, not a shake, not a test to see if it was locked. A slow, deliberate turn. The metal grinded, the chain lock caught after an inch with a sharp clack. The door opened, just that much, a crack of blackness, before stopping against the chain. No wind rushed in, no sound. I stared at that sliver of darkness, holding my breath until my lungs burned, my muscles locked in paralysis. Nothing moved on the other side, no eye peered through. After what felt like hours, the knob turned again, slowly. The door clicked shut, the latch engaged. I didn't move until the sun came up and the gray light of dawn washed over the room. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen, exhausted and wired, and stopped cold. The angel was sitting on the kitchen table, just sitting there, perfectly still, perfectly upright, its one remaining wing bent slightly outward, like it was reaching for something or someone. There was no snow on it. It was dry. I called Uncle Nate in. He walked in, took one look at it, and went completely pale, the blood draining from his face. He didn't ask where I found it. He didn't ask how it got inside a locked house. He picked it up gently, with a reverence that terrified me, almost like he didn't want to touch it at all, but had to. Then he walked out the back door and into the woods, marching straight into the tree line. He didn't say a word. I watched the trees for a long time after he disappeared into them, waiting for him to come back, but he stayed out there for over an hour. He never said what he did with it. He never mentioned it again. That was our last Christmas there. Now, I don't do decorations, I don't play holiday music, and I definitely, absolutely, do not collect figurines. A desolate stretch of timber in the eastern part of Kentucky, dangerously close to the West Virginia line where the cell service goes to die and the roads are barely wide enough for a single truck. Laya had just dragged herself back east after a brutal, soul-crushing breakup in Washington state, the gloom of the Pacific Northwest, not DA, and she was desperate for a change of scenery that didn't remind her of him. I was grinding away working warehouse nights back in Greenville, breaking my back loading trucks and living in a studio apartment that I treated more like a storage unit than a home, so neither of us had any holiday plans that mattered. We figured, why not disappear? It sounded perfect on paper. A week in the woods, just the two of us, a deck of cards, and absolutely no extended family breathing down our necks asking why we were still single or what we were doing with our lives. Laya found the listing online, a rustic retreat that promised isolation. We packed the car with enough groceries to feed an army, a high-end Bluetooth speaker, a stack of board games we probably wouldn't play, and 2 bottles of high-proof bourbon to keep the cold at bay. The plan was simple: drink, decompress, and delete the rest of the world for a few days. Christmas Eve started out exactly how we wanted it, with a dinner of boxed mac and cheese mixed with sliced hot dogs, the kind of comfort food you only eat when no one is judging you, and we played cards until our hands got clumsy and our eyes got heavy. The fire in the hearth was crackling, throwing dancing shadows against the log walls, and the bourbon was doing its job, wrapping us in a warm, numb haze. We queued up some movie Laya had downloaded on her tablet, but it froze halfway through due to a corrupted file, and honestly, that was fine because neither of us was paying attention anyway. She eventually drifted off on the oversized leather couch, wrapped in a quilt, and I turned in early, heading to the back bedroom. I remember lying there, pulling the heavy wool blankets up to my chin, thinking that coming out here had been a stroke of genius, a perfect escape from reality. Then, the reality of the human body woke me up around 3000 not from a noise or a nightmare, but with that jarring full-body alertness that only comes from a bladder that has officially run out of patience. I lay there in the dark for a solid minute, staring at the ceiling beams, trying to mentally will the urge away because I knew exactly what was waiting for me. The cabin didn't have indoor plumbing. The listing's description of rustic amenities was a polite way of saying there was a freezing cold outhouse sitting about 20 yards behind the cabin in the tree line. Finally admitting defeat, I threw on my heavy coat, shoved my feet into my unlaced boots, grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight, and stepped out the back door. The cold hit me like a physical blow, a solid wall of freezing air that felt like it had teeth. Appalachian cold is different than city cold. It doesn't care how many thermal layers you're wearing, it cuts straight through to your bones and settles there. The snow was deep, maybe a foot or more, and freshly crusted over with ice, so every step I took crunched loudly, sounding like breaking glass in the absolute silence of the woods. The air was heavy, suffocatingly still, with no wind, no nocturnal animals, just the sound of my own jagged breathing and the crunch of my boots. I was keeping my head down, focusing on the path, and just as I was rounding the back corner of the cabin, I heard it. Harper. The sound stopped me dead in my tracks, freezing the blood in my veins faster than the air ever could. The voice came from the tree line, maybe 20 feet away to my left. It was female, calm, and unmistakably familiar. It sounded exactly like Laya. I whipped the flashlight beam toward the woods, the light cutting through the darkness and illuminating the snow-heavy branches of the pines. "Laya!" I called out, my voice trembling. The light landed on nothing but tree trunks and shadows. There were no footprints in the pristine snow, no movement, no sign of life, but the voice had been right there, clear as a bell. Then it happened again, quieter this time, more intimate. "Harper, come here a second." It was the same tone, the same cadence, the same pitch, but something about it was fundamentally wrong. I can't explain it perfectly, but it was like hearing your best friend's voice through a bad cellular connection where the audio is compressed, mostly right, but just a little too clean, a little too digital, lacking the wet, organic warmth of a human throat. There was absolutely no reason Laya would have followed me out here, barefoot in the freezing snow, whispering from the trees in the middle of the night. Slowly, terrified of what I might see, I turned my head back toward the cabin. Through the frosted glass of the living room window, illuminated by the dying embers of the fire, I saw her. Laya was standing inside, wrapped in that same blanket, staring out into the dark, watching me. She hadn't moved. I looked back toward the trees, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Still nothing, just a strip of pine trunks fading into the infinite darkness beyond the flashlight's beam. My stomach knotted in a slow, crawling way that made me want to vomit. I swallowed hard and said, loud enough to carry to the trees, not funny. I didn't wait for a response. I power-walked the rest of the way to the outhouse, did my business with the door cracked open, and sprinted back to the cabin without ever fully turning my back to the woods. When I'd burst back inside and locked the door, the warmth of the cabin felt wrong, stifling. The air was heavy and still, like the room itself had been holding its breath while I was outside. Laya hadn't moved an inch. She was still standing at the window, the same blanket draped over her, the same vacant expression on her face. I asked, "You good?" Nothing, no blink, no nod, just a 1,000-yard stare. I stepped closer, unnerved, and touched her shoulder gently. She flinched violently, like I'd poured a bucket of ice water down her back, and gasped. Then, without looking at me, staring straight ahead at the reflection in the glass, she whispered, "You heard it too. We didn't sleep that night, not really." We sat up by the fire, feeding it logs until it roared, each of us clutching our bourbon bottle like a weapon. At some point, we pulled the heavy curtains closed, but it didn't help the feeling of being watched. I kept checking the front door deadbolt, checking the window latches, acting like I was expecting someone to knock. The next morning, Christmas Day, we pretended everything was fine. We made coffee, ate dry cereal because neither of us had the appetite to cook, and talked about fox calls and alcohol-induced dreams. The usual nonsense you reach for when you don't want to admit you were scared out of your mind. But we didn't go outside. We stayed strictly within the walls until late afternoon when the cabin started closing in on us, that cabin fever mixing with the lingering dread. Laya finally offered to take the trash out to the shed behind the cabin, saying she desperately needed some fresh air to clear her head. She threw on her coat, leaving it half-zipped, slipped her feet into her loose boots, and headed out the back door with the garbage bag slung over her shoulder. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. I was washing a mug in the sink when I realized how quiet it was. I figured she got distracted, maybe spotted a deer or some animal tracks. Then 20 minutes ticked by, and the silence began to scream. I got that deep stomach hollow kind of dread, the kind that tells you something is catastrophically wrong. I went to the back door and threw it open. The trash bag was lying in the snow halfway between the porch and the shed, abandoned, but Laya was gone. I stepped out onto the porch and called her name, Laya. Nothing, not even an echo returning from the hills. I grabbed the flashlight, my hands shaking, and ran out, doing a fast loop around the shed. Nothing behind it, no fresh prints going further into the woods from that angle. Then, just as I was about to head down the slope past the tree line, I saw her. She was crawling, literally crawling on her hands and knees through the deep snow about 30 feet out into the tree line. Her eyes were wild, blown wide with panic. Her face was scraped up, bleeding, and her hair was stuck to her cheeks in frozen matted strands. She wasn't wearing boots anymore. Her hands were bare, red, and raw from the ice. She kept whispering, over and over, "Don't let it call me again. Don't let it call me again." I ran out, yanked her up by the arm, and half-dragged her back inside the cabin, locking the door behind us with trembling fingers. Her whole body was trembling violently, vibrating with hypothermia and shock. Her coat had come open, and her jeans were soaked through with snow. I stripped the wet layers off her and wrapped her in everything we had, blankets, towels, my own coat, and sat her directly in front of the fire. She clutched the blanket to her face and rocked back and forth like a traumatized child trying to wake up from a nightmare. It took nearly an hour of silence before she said anything coherent. She told me that when she stepped outside, she had heard my voice. "Harper," it said, "come help me. I'm hurt." It sounded pained, urgent. She thought I had slipped out the front and gotten injured. She followed the sound past the shed, but every time she got close to the source, the voice moved just a few steps ahead, always remaining just out of sight behind the next tree. It stayed calm, friendly, urging her forward until she stopped walking, realizing something was wrong. Then the voice changed. It dropped the facade. "Don't stop now," it hissed, right in her ear. "You're almost here." She turned to run, slipped on the hidden ice, and scrambled away. That's how she scraped her face. But what really scared her, she said, wasn't the fall, it was what came after. Nothing, just silence. That night, we pushed the heavy oak couch against the front door, sat by the fire with kitchen knives in our laps, not speaking, not even pretending to be okay. We didn't sleep a wink. We didn't turn on any overhead lights, just the fire. When the sun finally came up, gray and bleak, we packed everything into the car in 5 minutes flat. We didn't even wash the dishes. We just left. Laya moved back to Spokane a couple of weeks later. I've seen her twice since then. She won't talk about that trip. Anytime I bring it up, she goes quiet, her eyes glaze over, and she acts like the conversation never started. As for me, I don't do cabins anymore. And I definitely don't step outside after dark when it's snowing, because I know that sometimes the wind isn't the only thing whistling through the trees. But the woods aren't the only place where things wait for you. Sometimes the danger is much higher up, where the air is thin and the isolation is absolute. My uncle Silas had invited us up to his place for Christmas that year. Me, my mom, and my cousin Ellis, who was 16 at the time and brimming with teenage angst. Silas lived by himself on this high, desolate ridge way out in Redfern County, a place that barely appeared on the GPS. He had built the house himself years back, a fortress of timber and stone, and he barely ever left it. We'd never done the holidays up in the mountains before, and honestly, the idea seemed kind of cool at first. A snowy getaway, no distractions, a break from the usual Christmas chaos of the suburbs. But by the second day, the novelty had worn off, and Ellis and I were seriously climbing the walls. The internet was out due to the storm. The satellite TV was frozen on a pixelated image of a news anchor, and Uncle Silas's idea of entertainment was a stack of Reader's Digest issues from 1994 and a crackling weather radio. So we did what bored teenagers do. We went snooping around in the detached garage. That's where we found it. Tucked behind a wall of neatly stacked firewood covered in dust and cobwebs was this weird rolled-up ice fishing tent. It still had the plastic tag from the manufacturer dangling off the side, looking brand new. We dragged it out, dusted it off, and showed it to Silas. He barely glanced at it, just nodded while sipping his black coffee and said something like, "Oh yeah, forgot about that thing. Got it in a trade from some guy a long time ago. Never used it." Ellis and I, desperate for any form of escape, decided to set it up just below the house near the tree line. There was a wide, flat spot with barely any slope, perfect for what we had in mind. The tent was dome-shaped, a pop-up style designed for harsh weather, and once we got it open, we saw it was in surprisingly pristine condition, stiff vinyl walls, heavy plastic flooring, barely any signs of wear. It looked like no one had ever actually spent a night in it. That night, begging our parents for permission, we loaded it up with double sleeping bags, layered ourselves in thermals and hoodies, and zipped ourselves in. It felt like this weird kind of freedom, like we were camping out on the edge of the world. No adults, no rules, just the snow, the trees, and us. We talked for hours until we passed out. At some point after midnight, I woke up. At first, I couldn't tell why. Ellis was snoring, this low, weird little whistling sound he makes when he's really out cold. Everything was pitch black inside the tent. But then I heard it, a soft, distinct dragging noise right outside the tent. It was subtle, like something brushing against the vinyl wall. Not fast or frantic, just slow, methodical, like someone was running a stick gently along the outside of the fabric, testing it. I held my breath, my heart hammering in my ears. The sound came again, and this time, in the faint ambient light filtering through the fabric, I saw the wall closest to me push in slightly. Just a small, smooth indentation, a curve pressing against the tent. It wasn't sharp or sudden. It moved, slid from one side to the other, then disappeared. I didn't say anything. I didn't move a muscle. I just stared at that spot until my eyes watered. I whispered Ellis's name, barely audible. Ellis. He shifted in his sleep but didn't wake up. After maybe a minute of agonizing silence, I sat up slowly, unzipped the flap with trembling fingers, and stepped outside. My boots sank into fresh snow. I walked in a full circle around the tent, flashing my phone light. No footprints, no broken branches, no drag marks, just undisturbed, pristine snow stretching out in every direction. I got back inside and sat upright, shivering, until the sun came up. Ellis woke up groggy, asked if I'd slept weird because I looked pale as a ghost. I shrugged it off and didn't bring up what I saw, convincing myself it was a dream. 2 days later, on Christmas Eve, we went back to the tent after lunch, planning to hang out and maybe build a snow fort nearby. But when we got there, the whole thing had collapsed. Not from snow weight. It hadn't snowed that much the night before. The poles weren't snapped either. It looked like something had slashed through the back wall. 3 long, jagged tiers, each one maybe 3 feet long, ran down the side. The weirdest part was that the cuts didn't go all the way through. They just sank partway into the thick vinyl, like whatever did it had pressed hard, with immense strength but not sharp enough to rip clean through. We called Silas over. He trudged down the hill, stood there looking at the tears without saying much, his face unreadable. After a long while, he just said, "Must have been a branch, even though there wasn't a single tree within 20 feet of that spot." Then he picked the entire tent up, crumpled it into a ball, and carried it out back without another word. That night, he burned it in the fire pit. He didn't even ask us if we wanted to try fixing it. He just stood there in the falling snow, watching the plastic warp, melt, and curl in the flames, the black smoke rising into the night. No explanation, no discussion, just gone. Christmas morning was quiet. The roads were still snowed over, so we were trapped inside all day. Around 500 a.m. I was lying in the guest room, just staring at the ceiling, not really sleeping, when I heard a sound that didn't belong on this earth. It started low, almost like a vibration under the floorboards. Then it rose fast into this high-pitched screech. It wasn't like metal on metal or brakes squealing. It was thinner than that, sharper, like something mechanical trying to imitate a biological scream and not quite getting it right. It hit this frequency that made my eyes sting and my teeth ache. I remember that part clearly, the physical pain of the sound. It didn't sound like a bobcat or a fox or anything I could name. Then it stopped, just like that. I mentioned it over breakfast. Silas didn't even look at me. He just shoveled eggs into his mouth and said, "You'll hear things up here. Ignore them." That was the last time I tried bringing it up. That night, I didn't sleep at all. On the 26th, just before dinner, Silas opened his heavy leather-bound Bible. It was kind of his tradition. He'd always read a passage after big meals, especially around the holidays. This time, he had barely gotten through the opening lines. Something about shepherds and angels, when the scream came again. Only now, it wasn't distant. It was right above us. It sounded like it tore straight through the roof, loud enough that the windows shook in their frames and the dust fell from the rafters. Silas dropped the Bible. It hit the floor with a thud. Ellis, who had been trying to act tough the whole trip, started crying immediately, not just tearing up, but full-on sobbing in terror. We searched everything. We checked the attic, the crawl space. We went outside with flashlights, crunching through the snow, weapons in hand. Nothing. Not a single track, not a branch out of place. But I swear I could still feel that sound resonating in my chest, like it was lodged somewhere deep behind my ribs, humming. That night, Silas locked every door and deadbolted the front and back. He shoved a heavy wooden chest against the back door and nailed the window shutters closed. He told us not to open anything, not even to peek. And after that, everything just felt wrong. We couldn't leave because the road down the ridge was still snowed in, a sheet of treacherous ice. So we stayed 2 more nights, and each night, just after dark, we'd hear the scream again. Always once, always from a different direction. Never closer, never farther. It was like it was circling the house, testing the perimeter. By the time the road cleared, all of us were jumpy, exhausted, and broken. Ellis wouldn't even go near the edge of the tree line. Silas didn't say a word on the drive back down the mountain. He just stared straight ahead, knuckles white on the steering wheel, the whole time. I didn't visit again for almost a year. By then, I was in college and decided to drive up during fall break just for the weekend. I figured I'd check in on Silas, maybe help him with some winter prep, see if he was okay. But when I got there, the place was locked up tight. All the curtains were drawn, the mailbox was stuffed full of yellowing letters, and his truck was still sitting in the driveway with a flat tire. I knocked, called his name, pounded on the door, no answer. I tried calling his cell phone. I heard it ringing inside the house, echoing in the empty rooms. The garage door was unlocked. I lifted it and walked inside. Everything was exactly the same as the year before. Tools neatly hung, firewood stacked, boots lined up. Except for one thing. On the back wall, right where we'd found that old tent tucked away the year before, there were 3 deep scratches in the wood. Long, vertical grooves, gouged deep into the timber, like someone or something had raked their hand down hard and slow. Behind the garage, I followed a line of snapped branches leading into the woods. They went on maybe 30 feet, then just stopped dead. Since then, I haven't seen Silas. No one has. And I don't sleep near windows anymore. That December, the humidity froze in the air before it could even hit the ground, turning the world into a jagged landscape of ice and gray sky, which was the perfect backdrop for the absolute mistake our church youth group made by signing up for an outreach program in the deep, forgotten boondocks of Marlow Ridge. I had never heard of the place, and for good reason, because it wasn't a town in any civilized sense of the word, but rather a desperate collection of rotting houses clinging to the sides of icy switchbacks like barnacles on a sinking ship. hidden so deep in the woods that sunlight seemed to give up before it hit the rooftops. The entire mission was framed as this heartwarming humanitarian project designed to bring Christmas to families who were looking at a bleak winter, offering hot meals, plastic-wrapped toys for the kids who probably needed coats more than action figures, and gas vouchers that were worth their weight in gold out there. They loaded us into these rattling, heating-deficient vans 2 days before Christmas Eve, packing us in like sardines alongside sleeping bags and cardboard boxes overflowing with donations. And while everyone else was singing carols, I was just staring out the window, not because I had some noble altruistic calling, but because freezing in the woods was marginally better than staying home and watching my dad pretend he wasn't miserable while assembling a fake pine tree that smelled like chemical sadness. A few of my friends were dragged along too, mostly because the trip counted for high school volunteer hours, which was the only currency that mattered to us at the time, making the whole thing a cynical win-win. Once we arrived at the base camp, which was little more than a drafty community hall that smelled of stale coffee and wet wool, the organizers split us up with military efficiency, assigning the lucky ones to stay warm in the kitchen while the rest of us were sent out into the tundra to deliver packages. I drew the short straw and got paired with the Luthers, an ancient couple from the congregation who looked like they had been carved out of the local bedrock. Mr. Stu Luther drove a dented, rusted-out red pickup truck with a plow attachment that looked like it had seen combat, and he was perpetually encased in one of those massive quilted coats that made him look less like a human and more like overstuffed living room furniture. Mrs. Luther was a woman of 0 words who spent the entire drive adjusting my scarf with aggressive bony fingers, muttering about frostbite, and looking at me like I was a fragile piece of china she was tasked with transporting across a minefield. Their assignment was the deep run, delivering food boxes to the houses that were too remote for the main caravan, nestled in areas where the snowplows didn't dare venture. A massive snowstorm had hammered the ridge the night before, dumping half a foot of fresh powder that hid the treacherous ice underneath, rendering most of the back roads completely impassable, especially the steep, winding ones that led to the outliers. This is where the sleds came in, actual, old-school wooden sleds with rusted iron runners and fraying rope handles, packed tight with canned corn, hand-knit scarves that smelled like mothballs, and little gift bags of toiletries that felt like a consolation prize for living in the middle of nowhere. At first, the novelty of it distracted me from the cold, the silence of the woods feeling peaceful rather than predatory. But that feeling evaporated the moment the Luthers stopped the truck at a dead end where the road simply dissolved into the tree line. Luther handed me a smaller sled of my own, pointed a gloved finger toward a narrow, darkness-choked trail, and told me I had 3 boxes to deliver to a marked location. The last name on the clipboard was circled in aggressive blue ink, Darren. Beside it, a hastily scrawled note read, "He'll meet you halfway if you make it by 1. But checking my watch, I saw it was already past 1, yet I figured close enough was good enough in a place where time seemed to stand still anyway. I adjusted my grip on the rope, told myself I could move fast if I stayed focused, and stepped off the safety of the road and into the suffocating embrace of the forest. The trail dipped immediately, plunging into a valley of shadows where the trees grew so thick they blotted out the gray sky, and at first it was just a physical trudge over packed snow, ducking under heavy pine branches that dumped powder down the back of my neck. The first few houses I passed looked ancient, beaten down by decades of harsh winters, but they were definitely inhabited, with smoke curling lazily from crumbling chimneys and the faint yellow glow of lamps in the windows. People would crack open their heavy oak doors just an inch, accept the boxes with trembling hands, and offer polite, exhausted thanks that made me feel like an intruder. One woman, her face a map of deep lines and hardship, actually started weeping when I handed her a bag of thick wool mittens, and I stood there in awkward silence, smiling like an idiot and backing away while she wiped her eyes, realizing just how close to the edge these people were living. After that, the road split, and my assigned path veered away from the cluster of homes and into the deeper, wilder part of the forest where the silence became heavy, almost pressurized. The sled became a burden, constantly snagging on hidden rocks and roots buried under the snow, forcing me to stop every 20 feet to yank it loose with a grunt of frustration. The trees closed in tighter, crowding the path like silent spectators, and the atmosphere shifted from winter walk to something far more oppressive, as if I were wading through invisible molasses. I started seeing things in my peripheral vision, tiny erratic flickers of light up ahead, soft and colorful glints that looked like someone had strung Christmas lights through the branches. But every time I picked up the pace to investigate, the lights would vanish, leaving only the dark trunks and the white snow. Eventually, the trees broke apart to reveal a circular clearing, and that was the moment my internal alarm bells went from a low hum to a screaming siren. The snow in this clearing was wrong. It was pristine, untouched, a perfect, smooth blanket of white without a single footprint, rabbit track, or disturbance from the wind, as if a giant glass jar had been placed over this specific circle of reality. I stood there, breath pluming in the freezing air, taking a glove off to check my watch again, trying to anchor myself in time, and that's when I finally looked up and really saw the trees surrounding the clearing. They weren't just trees, they were displays. Hanging from the branches were hundreds of handmade ornaments, but not the cute kind you make in kindergarten. These were pine cones dipped in thick black wax wire stars that were rusted to the point of looking like tetanus hazards, and little straw dolls with their arms outstretched in a way that looked less like a hug and more like a sacrificial pleading, the kind of decorations you'd see in a museum exhibit about 19th century Appalachian witchcraft. I might have brushed it off as some eccentric local art project, if not for one impossible detail. Some of those ornaments were hanging 30 feet in the air, way higher than anyone could reach without a cherry picker or serious climbing gear, yet the snow beneath the trees was completely undisturbed. My stomach tightened into a knot of cold dread, and then came the second realization, the one that made the hair on my arms stand up inside my coat. I wasn't alone. He was just there, standing between two massive oaks, so motionless that my brain had initially registered him as a stump. The snow had started to fall again, turning the world into a fuzzy gray static, but he remained terrifyingly sharp, like he was cut out of a different photograph and pasted into my vision. He wore a heavy brown coat that looked stiff with age, a red scarf wrapped tight around his neck, and thick gloves, looking to be in his 40s, neither scruffy nor clean-cut, just disturbingly ordinary, except for what he was clutching in his right hand. I squinted through the falling snow, my mind desperately trying to rationalize the situation, thinking maybe it was a flashlight and he was a neighbor coming to guide me. "Are you Mr. Darren?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and pathetic in the vastness of the woods. He didn't answer. He didn't twitch. He didn't even blink. I took a hesitant step forward, one hand still gripping the sled handle like a lifeline, and as I got closer, the object in his hand resolved into focus, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't a flashlight. It was a bundle of holly branches, the kind with deep green, glossy leaves and bright red berries. But they weren't tied together with ribbon or twine. They were bound tight with barbed wire, the jagged, rusted teeth biting into the wood, a bouquet of pain held with a lover's care. He smiled then, just a fraction, and it wasn't a smile of greeting, it was the smile of someone recognizing a target. I had no idea what the protocol was for a moment like that, so I just turned around, feigning a casual need to adjust the sled straps, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. When I glanced back over my shoulder, he had moved. He hadn't run, I hadn't heard footsteps, but he was 10 feet closer, standing in the exact same pose. That broke me. I didn't yell, I didn't try to reason with him. I just abandoned all pretense of bravery and started walking fast, hauling the sled which now felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The sled bounced and tipped, dragging me back, and then I heard it. Not footsteps, but a heavy, wet, crunching sound, like something dead being dragged through the snow. I let go of the sled at the next curve, abandoning the donations, and broke into a full sprint, my lungs burning as the freezing air tore at my throat. The trail disintegrated into chaos, so I picked the widest gap in the trees and scrambled through it, not knowing where I was going, just knowing that away was the only direction that mattered. I kept scanning for anything man-made, and finally, through the blur of panic, I spotted a stone chimney rising above a ridge, a ranger station. It looked abandoned, dark and lifeless, but I didn't care. I bolted for the door, threw my weight against it, and thanked God when the handle turned. I slammed it shut behind me, locked the deadbolt, and collapsed behind a metal filing cabinet, my legs shaking so violently I kept bumping the metal drawers, creating tiny echoing clangs that sounded like gunshots in the silence. I held my breath until my chest screamed, listening. Then, the doorknob slowly, deliberately began to turn. It rattled softly, testing the lock, then stopped. Silence. Then, the sound of a key sliding into the mechanism. The lock clicked. The door creaked open, letting a gust of freezing wind and snow swirl into the room. He stepped inside. He didn't speak. He didn't look around for me. He walked with a slow, terrifying cadence to the center of the room, placed the bundle of barbed wire-wrapped holly on the doormat, turned on his heel, and walked back out into the storm. I stayed curled in a ball behind that cabinet until the windows went completely black with night. Only then did I slip out the back exit, running until I found the main road and eventually the Luthers' truck. I told them I got lost and had to ditch the sled to survive. They didn't ask questions. They just looked at my pale face and drove me home. I never told anyone about the gift he left for me. But that cold, metallic fear followed me, bleeding into other parts of my life, surfacing years later when I thought I was safe. It was a different winter, but the same creeping dread found me when my cousin Cal and I were staying at our aunt's place the week before Christmas. She and her immediate family had driven down to Knoxville to visit in-laws, leaving us to sit their sprawling log cabin up on Sugar Ridge, a place that was usually a haven of nostalgia for us. We grew up running these woods, knew the local wildlife, the quirks of the neighbors, and the silence of the mountains usually felt like a warm blanket, not a shroud. The only real responsibility we had, aside from not burning the place down, was to help her finish decorating for the holidays, which meant tackling the list she'd left on the counter, stringing lights around the porch, hanging pine garlands in the hallway, and retrieving the big Santa from the shed. This Santa was a family relic, a massive, hand-painted wooden statue standing nearly 6 feet tall, and honestly, it was nightmare fuel. It had a carved grin that was too wide, eyes that didn't quite line up, and it held a lantern in one hand that always seemed to cast shadows in the wrong direction. My aunt always insisted it stand by the front steps like a sentry. The shed was tucked into the hillside behind the house, completely blocked from view of any window, packed to the rafters with bins of holiday junk and old tools. By the time I dragged the wooden monstrosity out into the daylight, my gloves were soaked through, and icy water was trickling down my wrists. I wrestled it into position next to the porch, stepping back to admire my work, and that's when I saw the movement. Just beyond the tree line, maybe 15 yards out, a man was standing in the snow. He wore a brown coat that looked eerily familiar, blending in with the tree trunks. I blinked, assuming it was a hunter, which wasn't uncommon around there, but he wasn't moving. He wasn't tracking anything. He was just watching me. I stared for a few seconds, trying to make out his face, then turned my head to shout for Cal to come look. In the split second, I looked away and looked back. The man was gone, vanished. No sound of crunching snow, no movement of branches. I told myself it was just the light playing tricks, the way snow falling through the trees can look like shifting shapes, but a cold prickle of unease settled at the base of my spine. I went back inside, locked the door, and didn't mention it. That night, we made a massive pot of cocoa, settled onto the overstuffed couches, and started a horror movie marathon, trying to recapture that childhood vibe. Around 10 p.m., during a lull in the movie, I glanced out the front window. The Santa had moved. It wasn't where I had placed it. It had rotated about 45 degrees, now facing sideways toward the open yard instead of the driveway. I felt a surge of irritation, assuming Cal was pranking me. "Did you mess with the Santa?" I asked, waiting for the smirk. Cal looked up, genuinely confused, and swore he hadn't touched it. We both put on our boots and went outside, breaths clouding in the frigid air. Sure enough, there were drag marks in the snow, not footprints, just 2 deep, distinct grooves where the heavy wooden base had been forcefully rotated. Cal looked at me like I was the one losing my mind, clearly thinking I was committing to a really boring bit. I didn't push it, but I didn't sleep well either. The next morning, the Santa was back in its original position, front-facing, perfectly centered, as if the night before had never happened. I assumed Cal had moved it back to gaslight me, and when I accused him, he got genuinely annoyed, swearing on his life he hadn't touched the creepy thing. We laughed it off uneasily, calling each other weirdos, but the air in the cabin felt thinner, tenser. Later that afternoon, I went out back to grab more firewood from the stack. On my way back to the house, I froze. In the pristine snow behind the shed, there were footprints, but they weren't boot prints, they were barefoot. Human, barefoot prints in 20-degree weather. They were small, distinct, but the gait was wrong. 1 foot turned inward sharply, and the spacing between steps was erratic, lurching. I followed them for maybe 20 feet, my heart pounding in my ears until they just stopped. Abruptly. No fading, no melting, just clean, unbroken snow beyond the last print, as if the walker had been plucked into the sky. That night, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted from cozy to claustrophobic. Cal called it an early night, unnerved by my mood, but I stayed up reading in the living room, unable to shake the image of those twisted barefoot tracks. Around midnight, the motion-activated floodlight on the porch clicked on with an audible pop. I crept to the window and pulled the curtain aside just an inch. The Santa was gone. My stomach dropped. I grabbed the heavy Maglite flashlight and stepped out onto the porch, the beam cutting through the darkness. I could see the drag marks clearly now. 2 long furrows leading down the steps and off into the darkness of the woods. I followed them, my hand shaking, walking about 30 yards until the tracks stopped at the base of a massive oak tree. And there it was, the Santa, propped up neatly against the trunk, facing back toward the house, facing me. There were no footprints around it, just the drag marks. I didn't touch it. I turned around and walked back to the house with a rigid, terrified dignity, refusing to run even though every instinct screamed at me to flee. When I got inside, Cal was standing in the hallway, his face pale as a sheet. "I heard tapping," he whispered. Soft, steady, rhythmic tapping. We both knew there were no trees close enough to the upstairs windows to cause that. We spent the next hour checking every lock, shutting every curtain, turning the cabin into a fortress. We crashed on the couches in the living room with all the lights on, keeping watch. At dawn, I went to check the tree. The Santa was back on the porch, original spot, no drag marks, no sign it had ever moved. It was maddening. That evening, a neighbor, Mrs. Gable, came by to drop off a pecan pie. She was one of those women who functioned as the local news network, and while handing over the pie, she asked, casually, "Hey, was one of you boys out walking near the ridge last night in a brown coat?" We froze. "No," I said. She frowned. "My husband saw someone standing out past the tree line just pacing back and forth. No flashlight, just walking in the dark, said it was between 11 and midnight." That broke the dam. We didn't even pretend to sleep that night. We sat at the kitchen table, nursing reheated coffee, staring at the black rectangles of the windows. Sometime after 1 a.m. we heard it. Tap, 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 not at the window this time. On the glass of the back door, right behind us. We sat there, paralyzed, barely breathing. Finally, fueled by a mix of terror and adrenaline, I stood up and moved toward the door. I looked through the glass. A face was hovering there in the porch light, not pressed against the glass, but standing a few inches back, eyes wide, unblinking, mouth slightly open, as if frozen mid-sentence. It was Greg. We hadn't seen Greg in 2 years. He used to be in Cal's circle, a guy who came to bonfires, but he had unraveled. He became fixated, obsessive, sending me messages that made my skin crawl until I blocked him. Cal had warned him to stay away, and he had vanished. Now, here he was, standing on our back porch in the middle of a snowstorm, staring with the dead eyes of a shark. We called the sheriff immediately. Greg didn't move while we were on the phone. He just stood there, staring as still as the wooden Santa. But by the time the deputy's cruiser lights flashed in the driveway, Greg was gone. The deputy found footprints circling the house over and over and over again, a tight loop of obsession. They followed the tracks into the woods, but just like the barefoot prints, they simply stopped in the middle of nowhere. The Santa was still standing by the porch, smiling its horrible carved smile. The deputy asked if we were moving it to scare each other, clearly thinking we were wasting his time. We left the next morning. We didn't finish the week. To this day, Cal and I don't go back to the cabin alone, and I can still hear that tapping every time it snows. At 21 years old, you operate under the distinct and dangerous impression that you are invincible, or at the very least that the world is a mundane place where the worst thing that can happen to you during winter break is acute boredom. But I learned the hard way that silence has a distinct sound, and the dark has a crushing weight when I agreed to watch over my aunt's Christmas tree lot just outside of Marlow. The lot itself was an isolated patch of gravel and dead grass situated right off a winding, pothole-riddled back road that was at least 3 miles from anything resembling a proper neighborhood or civilization. My aunt had run the operation for years, treating it as a seasonal cash cow that ran from the slushy gray days of late November straight through to the bitter cold of New Year's. And while she mostly hired local high school kids to help with the heavy lifting and the netting, by the week before Christmas, the labor force had evaporated. Most of them had clocked out to be with their families, to drink eggnog, or to simply get out of a town that felt like it was dying, so it was just me left for that final lonely stretch. Most nights were a study in monotony, where I would walk the perimeter of the lot around closing time, listening to the gravel crunch beneath my boots, before tallying up the meager earnings in the dented metal cash box and locking the front gate with a heavy padlock that felt like ice against my skin. Nobody really came by after 7 anyway. The darkness of the countryside swallowing the road whole, until that Saturday, the weekend right before Christmas around 5:30 in the evening. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving a bruised purple sky when a vehicle pulled in that made the hair on my arms stand up before I even saw the driver. It was a beat-up green Chevy, a relic from a different decade, the kind of truck with one headlight permanently dimmed to a sickly yellow and rust eating away at the wheel wells like a cancer. The driver didn't roll down his window, didn't wave, and didn't offer a single pleasantry when he parked. He just killed the engine, got out, and walked with a heavy, deliberate gait up to the middle row of trees, pointing a gloved finger at a 6-foot Douglas fir. He wore heavy industrial work gloves, which stood out immediately because it wasn't even that cold that day, mid-40s, if that, and he was bundled in a thick canvas coat, old leather boots that looked like they had walked through hell, and a brimmed cap pulled low enough to shadow his eyes. I asked him, using my best customer service voice, if he needed it netted or trimmed, trying to bridge the uncomfortable silence, but he just shook his head once, a sharp, mechanical motion, and handed me exact cash. Not a word left his lips, just bills folded crisp and flat, pressed into my hand with a strange urgency. Now, that kind of quiet isn't entirely weird out in the sticks, to be honest, because some people just don't talk much and prefer to keep their business to themselves, but there was something about how utterly still he was that bothered me on a primal level. He stood there right by the driver's door, watching as I struggled to tie the tree to his roof rack with freezing twine, but he wasn't staring at me, he was just existing next to the truck, void of any fidgeting or impatience. I noticed his windshield was a graveyard of old toll stickers, layered and sun-faded like they hadn't been changed in years, documenting a history of travel I couldn't decipher, and dangling from his rearview mirror was a plastic dew skull, yellowed and hollow, looking less like a decoration and more like a warning, something you'd win at a twisted carnival and forget in your garage until it rotted. I didn't ask about it, didn't want to engage, and he drove off without a word, leaving me standing in the exhaust fumes, and I figured that was the end of it, just another weird encounter in a weird town. That night around 9, I did the usual lockup routine, turning off the string lights that buzzed overhead when I noticed something odd that made my stomach drop. One of the smaller trees from the front row was gone. Not the one I'd sold him, but a completely different one from the same row, just a different tag. I assumed maybe someone had swung by at the last minute, and another worker had sold it without logging it, perhaps pocketing the cash. But when I checked the clipboard, there was no entry, no cash missing, nothing marked down, and the confusion started to itch at the back of my brain. I walked the perimeter, checking the chain link fence, but the side gate was shut tight, and there were no fresh footprints in the snow or mud, just an empty patch where the tree used to be. The thing is, stealing a tree from our lot would take genuine effort because they weren't small saplings. Even dragging one off would leave a trail in the gravel or a sweet mark in the slush. But there was absolutely nothing, not a broken branch, not a bent nail on the wooden railing, just one tree gone like it had never existed in the first place. I figured it was a clerical error, something my aunt had messed up, so I wrote it off, moved on, and tried to ignore the creeping feeling that I was being watched. Monday night, I was doing my final walk around before locking up, the air biting at my face, and I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks and made my breath catch in my throat. There was a tree in that same empty spot where the missing one had been, only it wasn't ours. The bark was stripped down smoother than anything we processed, almost like bone, and the trunk didn't have a price tag, no colored twine, no trimming on the base to help it drink water. It was just a pale, gray-toned thing with sagging branches and a kind of dull, oily sheen that caught the moonlight in a way that made me nauseous. It didn't even look like it had been cut fresh. It looked dead, ancient, like it had been drowned in a swamp for a decade and then dragged up to land. I reached out and touched one of the branches, more out of morbid curiosity than anything else, and felt instant regret as my skin made contact. It was cold, ice cold and slick, like old meat wrapped in plastic, and the sensation clung to my fingertips for a second, leaving behind a faint smell I couldn't place. Not quite rot, not pine either, just something fundamentally wrong. My stomach turned a little, a biological rejection of what was in front of me, and I stood there for a while, just listening to the absolute silence of the woods. The wind wasn't blowing, there were no cars on the road, just that thick, oppressive silence you get deep in the hills when nature itself is holding its breath. Then, acting on autopilot, I picked it up carefully, disgusted by the texture, and dragged it out to the burn pile behind the trailer, tossing it on top of the refuse before locking everything up for the night, desperate to wash my hands. The next morning I passed the pile on the way out to open the gate, and my heart hammered against my ribs when I saw the tree was gone. The branches that had been crushed under other stuff were still there, undisturbed, but the weird gray one was just gone. No ash, no scattered needles, not even a smell left behind, as if it had simply evaporated. I didn't tell my aunt because how do you explain something like that without sounding insane? Later that day, Tuesday around mid-afternoon, the same green Chevy rolled in again, like a shark circling a cage. He didn't get out, didn't buy anything, just parked at the edge of the lot with his engine running and his windows fogged up from the heat inside. He sat there behind the glass like he was watching for something or someone, a silhouette in the steam, and I avoided looking directly at him, keeping my head down, sweeping needles, straightening rows, doing anything to not give him the attention he seemed to be demanding. By 8 o'clock, he was still there, a dark sentinel in the corner of the lot, so I finally called my aunt. She told me not to approach him, to just close up and head straight to the trailer to make sure everything was locked and to stay inside until morning. only when I got to the trailer. The door was cracked open, just a sliver of darkness visible against the white siding. It was one of those older locks that never quite seals, but I always latched it, always, and I felt a little jolt in my gut, a primal warning, the second I saw the gap. Inside, nothing looked touched at first, except for the kitchen table and the tree, the same one I dragged out to the burn pile the night before, standing there in the middle of the room. It was just standing there, upright, with no base, no water, no netting to support it. The bottom was jagged, like someone had torn it out of the ground with brute force instead of cutting it, and pine bits and mud were tracked all over the linoleum floor. The air inside the trailer felt humid, oppressive, like the tree had brought in its own weather system, and the branches were damp, dripping little drops that hit the floorboards every few seconds with a maddening tap, tap, tap. I backed out slowly, didn't touch a thing, got in my car, and drove straight into town, not even grabbing my jacket, just needing to put miles between me and that thing. I found a diner still open, the fluorescent lights buzzing like a sanctuary, and used the payphone to call the sheriff's office, telling them what happened, giving them the plate number on the Chevy, my voice shaking. The deputy was patient, but clearly not convinced, his tone patronizing as he said it was probably someone messing around, a local playing a joke on the city kid. He said unless the guy stepped onto private property while I was there or did something criminal, they couldn't follow up, leaving me helpless. I didn't go back that night. I checked into a cheap motel on the highway and tried not to think about the damp, gray branches, but sleep was impossible. The next morning, I returned with my aunt, dread pooling in my stomach. The trailer was normal, spotless, no mud, no pine needles, no smell, just an empty table and a clean floor. She gave me a look, half concern, half suspicion, but didn't say anything, and I could tell she thought I'd either dreamed it or exaggerated it to get out of work. Christmas Eve was the last night I planned to stay out there, and snow was supposed to roll in overnight, a heavy blanket to cover the world, so we closed the lot early around 6. My aunt left, and I said I'd stick around just to finish the paperwork, maybe take inventory one last time before the place shut down for New Year's, a decision I would regret for the rest of my life. At 8:40, I heard the back gate creak open, the sound of metal on metal screeching through the cold air. I flicked off the interior lights immediately, plunging the trailer into darkness, moved to the window, and lifted the edge of the blinds just enough to see the lot. That same guy was there again, the green Chevy idling in the distance. Only this time he was outside, dragging something across the gravel. It wasn't a tree, it was long and narrow, wrapped tight in a blue tarp, and it left deep twin tracks behind it in the gravel, heavy and dead. He moved slow, methodically, like whatever was inside had significant weight to it, too heavy for wood, too lumpy for firewood, and it slumped in the middle as he pulled. He brought it 10 feet from the trailer, then stopped, let it sit there in the snow like an offering, and then he walked away back toward the gate with the same pace, same silence, same terrifying calm. I waited 15 minutes, then half an hour, staring at the blue shape in the snow, sweating in the freezing trailer. Nothing moved. Finally, I opened the back window, climbed out into the snow, and crept across the lot to the main shed, locked myself inside, and called the sheriff's number again. My hands shaking so hard I dropped the phone twice. While I was on hold, listening to the agonizing beep, I peeked out through the front window of the shed, and that's when I saw the others, 6 figures standing just beyond the fence line, silhouetted against the dark woods. At first, I thought they were trees, tricks of the light. But trees don't move. One step forward, a jerky, unnatural motion, and I saw bare feet on frost, pale legs, thin arms that looked like twigs. They were shaped like trees, tall and narrow with limbs that drooped, but they weren't trees, they were something mimicking life. They didn't look at me. They were facing the trailer, fixated on it. Then the line clicked, and the dispatcher came on, her voice startling me. I gave them everything, my name, the address, what I'd seen, screaming in a whisper. I stayed on the phone until I saw a headlight swing through the lot 15 minutes later, the blue lights of the cruiser washing away the shadows. By the time the deputy got there, the figures were gone, dissolved back into the woods. The man in the Chevy never came back after that night. But on New Year's Day, when I returned to grab the last of my stuff, dreading every step, I found that tree again, the gray, oily one, leaning against the trailer steps like it had been delivered overnight. I dragged it behind the lot, poured an entire can of lighter fluid on it, and burned it to ash, watching the flames lick the sky until nothing but smoke and gray flakes floated in the wind, vowing never to return. But winter has a way of following you, and that wasn't the last time the cold felt predatory. A year later, I was 22 when I stayed at my aunt's cabin for Christmas break, thinking a change of scenery would help me forget the tree lot. She offered it to me while she was off visiting my cousin in California, describing it as a peaceful retreat. It's way out in this remote part of western Pennsylvania, a landscape of just trees, rolling hills, and a frozen creek that runs below the slope her place sits on. I figured after finals and 3 straight months of non-stop academic pressure, the silence might actually do me some good, cleanse the palate of my mind. The cabin itself is small, rustic, just 2 rooms and a loft with a wood stove that clanks and ticks while it heats, expanding and contracting like a metallic lung. The driveway winds up behind a ridge, so once you pull in, the road disappears completely, leaving you truly alone. By the second night, I was on the couch with a paperback and a glass of bourbon, listening to the wind nudge the window panes, feeling safe. I had the routine down, cook something simple, go for a walk in the woods while the sun was up, read until I passed out. It snowed a little every night, just enough to keep everything fresh and quiet, a pristine white mask over the world. On Christmas Eve, I mostly hung around, made some pasta, and watched a dumb action movie on my laptop, trying to keep the holiday cheer alive alone. Just after midnight, I realized the fire was dying, the embers fading to a dull red, and went out to grab more logs from the woodshed. That's when I saw the footprints. They weren't mine. They weren't old either. The snow was too clean, too perfect. Just a single set of boot prints coming from the tree line to the shed, and then from the shed straight to the back steps of the cabin. No return trail. Just a stop right there at the door. I crouched down and counted them. 8, maybe 10 prints in total sunk deep into the powder. I remember staring at the trees, scanning the darkness, like I was waiting for something to move, for the creator of the tracks to reveal themselves. Nothing did. I stood there longer than I probably should have, letting the cold seep into my bones. Then I told myself maybe they were older than they looked, and I just missed them earlier, a lie to keep the panic at bay. Snow can do weird things with tracks, distorting size and depth. I locked the doors, dragged the little dining table in front of the front door as a barricade, and sat back down with my book. But I didn't read a word of it. I barely slept, my eyes darting to the window every time the fire creaked or shifted. Christmas morning, I went out to check again, thinking maybe I'd imagined how clear those tracks were in the dark. But no, they were even sharper in the daylight, way bigger than my boots, and they came in too straight, too purposeful. And still, there was no return path, implying whoever made them had walked to the house and vanished, or entered. I walked the perimeter of the cabin, checked the shed, looked under the porch with a flashlight, my heart in my throat. Nothing looked disturbed, nothing missing. But I couldn't shake the feeling someone had been watching me, studying me through the glass. In the afternoon, it started snowing again. Slow, soft flakes, the kind that fall straight down without any wind, suffocating the world in white. I tried to shake the uneasiness, forcing myself to be rational. I made cookies using an old molasses and ginger recipe my aunt kept on a stained index card taped inside the cupboard, the smell of spices filling the small space. It actually helped a bit, grounding me. For a few minutes, it felt almost normal until the power went out. No flicker, no warning, just a soft pop, and then everything died. Lights, fridge, radio total, absolute quiet. I gave it a few seconds thinking maybe it would blink back on, just a grid fluctuation, nothing. So, I grabbed the heavy flashlight, checked the breaker in the pantry, hoping for a tripped switch. All looked fine. I stepped outside and squinted at the pole line running down toward the road. No ice buildup, no fallen limbs, just darkness stretching for miles. I made another fire, boiled some water for tea on the stove, and sat back down, trying to talk myself down from the ledge of panic. Rural outages aren't rare, they happen all the time. But there was a kind of wrongness to this one, a heaviness in the air that was hard to explain. It wasn't just the blackout, it was that same crawl under my skin I'd felt the night before, the sensation of being observed. I locked everything tight, closed the heavy curtains, and put the flashlight next to me on the couch like a weapon. Around 10 o'clock, I heard a knock, just one. Firm, slow, like someone using the side of their fist against the solid wood. My stomach dropped into my shoes. There hadn't been any sound before it. No footsteps, no car tires on snow, not even crunching gravel, just that one knock appearing out of the void. I didn't answer, didn't move a muscle. Then I killed the fire, drowning the room in shadows, and turned off the flashlight. The cabin went pitch dark. A second knock came just like the first, deliberate and heavy. Still, I didn't move. I sat there holding my breath, heart pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Minutes passed like hours. Then something brushed the window behind the couch. Not a tap, not a knock, but a slow, deliberate press like someone dragging their palm across the glass, testing the barrier. That did it. I grabbed the fireplace poker, A heavy iron rod, and backed into the bedroom, shut the door, and locked it, shoving a chair under the handle. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type, but I turned on my phone anyway, hoping, praying for a single bar of service. Nothing. I tried dialing 911 anyway, just in case. No connection. I kept checking every 10 minutes, watching the battery drain. Still nothing. At some point after midnight, the radio in the kitchen turned back on. I hadn't touched it. The power was still out. Just this quiet static at first, like the volume was turned way down, a white noise whisper. Then a man's voice started humming along with, "O Holy Night." Not singing, just humming, a low guttural vibration that seemed to come from inside the walls. I didn't move, didn't make a sound, convinced that if I breathed, he would hear me. I stayed right there with the door locked, poker gripped tight in both hands until my knuckles turned white. Eventually, the voice stopped. The radio clicked off on its own. That was it. When the sky started to lighten, turning from black to gray, I finally unlocked the door and stepped out, fully expecting to see someone standing in the living room. It was empty. I didn't wait around to investigate. I went back inside, shoved everything into my bag in a frenzy, and started clearing the driveway with manic energy. I was down the road an hour later, driving just behind the first plow truck, shaking uncontrollably. Power came back the next day, according to the utility company. No reported outages in the area for that night. My aunt said she'd never had a problem in that cabin, even during ice storms, and looked at me like I was fragile. I didn't tell her everything, just that I'd gotten spooked being alone, leaving out the humming and the footprints. I haven't spent Christmas by myself since, and I never will again, because I know now that when the snow falls and the silence settles, something else wakes up, and it's always watching. Jonah looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside, his eyes carrying the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had just wrapped up a brutal contract job out in a shovel, the kind of work that strips the soul off your bones layer by layer until you forget what it feels like to sleep without chemical assistance. We hadn't seen each other in almost a year, but the silence between us was heavy with things we were too afraid to say. And I think we both felt the crushing weight of existing in a world that suddenly felt too loud and too fast. He called me late one night in early December, his voice cracking over the line like dry twigs, and asked, "What if we just disappear for a few days? Just a cabin in the woods, you and me, like when we were kids before everything got so complicated." I said sure, with the casual dismissal of someone who doesn't expect plans to materialize, but I didn't take it seriously until he followed up the next day with a screenshot of his approved time off and a rental suggestion that looked less like a vacation home and more like a warning. The place looked old, hand-built from timber, that had grayed under decades of harsh mountain winters, sitting deep in the hills near a spot called Keeby Ridge, somewhere north of Burnsville, a desolate stretch of Appalachia not too far from where our aunt used to live before she vanished into a nursing home. We drove up together on December 2020, crammed into his beat-up Forester that smelled of stale coffee and gasoline, the back loaded with duffel bags, grocery totes filled with non-perishables, and enough high-proof bourbon to kill a horse or at least numb the memories of the past year. The GPA signal died a painful death about 30 minutes before we arrived, the digital map spinning aimlessly into a gray void, so we had to rely on the host's printed directions, which were cryptic at best. The road turned sketchy pretty quick, transitioning from paved asphalt to patches of black ice, then to nothing but gravel winding through trees so bare and skeletal it felt like the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting for us to make a mistake. The last 2 miles were rough. The kind of rough where the suspension screams and you keep one hand on the door handle, just in case you need to bail out before the car slides off the edge of the world. Our tires crunched violently through packed snow, and we fishtailed around the last bend, the headlights cutting through the gloom. The sun had dipped behind the ridge hours ago, and the woods looked darker than they should have at that hour, a supernatural heaviness that seemed to press against the glass. When we finally pulled up, the porch light was already on, a dull, sickly yellow bulb that didn't illuminate anything so much as it made the surrounding darkness feel more aggressive. No one came out to meet us. There was no sound, not even the rustle of wind or the call of winter birds, just a vacuum of silence that made my ears ring. Inside, the cabin smelled intensely of pine sap and old firewood, a scent that was almost cloying. The cast iron stove in the living room was radiating heat, the metal ticking as it cooled, which was strange because the rest of the place was freezing, cold enough to see your breath plume in the air. Jonah set our bags down and crouched next to the stove, holding his trembling hands out to the residual warmth. "Feels like someone was just here," he whispered, his voice too loud in the quiet room, and I couldn't tell if he found that comforting or if it sent a shiver down his spine like it did mine. There was a handwritten note on the kitchen table next to a tin of stale Danish cookies. It read, "Merry Christmas. Make yourself at home," but the date was back on the 26th of the previous year, and the writing was all swoops and loops, very proper, like the kind of archaic cursive you only see in holiday cards from dead relatives or on wedding invitations from the 1920s. We explored the place slowly, moving like intruders in a museum. It had just 2 bedrooms, one bathroom with a clawfoot tub that looked like a coffin, a galley kitchen with ancient appliances, and a tiny den with a sagging couch that smelled of dust. Jonah took the room with the red quilt and the little antique rocking chair in the corner that seemed to face the door no matter how you angled it. I took the one that faced the tree line out back. My window was small and square, the glass rippled with age, with frost already creeping along the corners like a fungus. That first night was deceptively relaxed. We played a few hands of rummy, the cards slapping rhythmically against the table, started in on the bourbon until our chests burned, and put on this weird stop-motion Christmas special from a dusty DVD pile we found. I think it was from the 80s. Bad animation, jerky movements, even worse jokes, but the artificial noise was a shield against the quiet outside. You don't realize how loud life is, the hum of electricity, the distant traffic, the buzz of phones, until you're somewhere completely still. It was the kind of silence that made you whisper without realizing it. A silence that felt attentive, like it was listening to us. No wind, no distant cars, not even a single owl hooting in the dark. The next morning, the world had been erased. Everything was white. The snow had kept falling through the night, relentless and silent, leaving a thick, untouched layer across everything like a shroud. I stood at the back window for a long time, nursing a hangover and just watching it, thinking it was kind of peaceful, like the world had been reset overnight. Then I noticed something that made the hair on my arm stand up. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, shadows playing across the drifts or maybe branches that had fallen during the night. But when I leaned in closer, pressing my forehead against the freezing glass, I saw them clearly. Footprints, just one set. No prints leading up to the cabin from the woods, just starting from right beneath the kitchen window and heading out toward the trees. I called Jonah over, my voice tight. He stared for a while, his eyes narrowing, then pulled on his boots and stepped out the back door. He didn't go far, maybe 10 feet, his body tense. He stood over the prints, looking down, then looked back at me through the window and shook his head slowly, his face pale. When he came back in, his ears were red from the cold, and he looked deeply uneasy, a fear settling behind his eyes that I hadn't seen since we were kids. "Only one set," he said, his voice dropping an octave, definitely barefoot, no prints coming in. "Just starting here, right at the wall and going out." We checked the kitchen window immediately. It was locked tight, painted shut almost, but there were faint, oily smudges on the outside of the glass. Not clear handprints or anything identifiable, just greasy marks like someone had leaned their forehead or a sweaty palm against it for a long time, watching us sleep. I tried to joke, said maybe a bear was trying to start a new life inside and forgot his shoes, but neither of us laughed. The air in the cabin had changed. The coziness was gone, replaced by a feeling of being observed. That night, we locked everything. Deadbolts, window latches, even the hatch to the crawl space Jonah found near the back that smelled like wet earth. He wedged a dining chair under the front doorknob, jam-locking it, and I stacked a couple of heavy cast-iron pans by the sliding door just in case, a makeshift alarm system. It felt a little silly, grown men afraid of the dark, but only because we didn't want to admit how tense we both were, how our instincts were screaming at us to leave. Around 3:00 in the morning, the witching hour, I woke up. I wasn't jolted awake by a noise, I was just suddenly terrifyingly aware. My heart was already beating hard, slamming against my ribs like it had been running a marathon while I slept, and I'd only just caught up to the panic. Then I heard it, a creak, soft but definite. Floorboard shifting under weight. I held my breath, my lungs burning, and listened. Another creak, closer this time, just outside my door. I sat up and the cold hit me physically. Not normal night cold, but a deeper drop, like the temperature in the room had plummeted 20 degrees in seconds. It was the kind of chill you feel in your teeth and the marrow of your bones. I whispered Jonah's name, hoping he was just getting water. Nothing. I got up, my bare feet recoiling from the icy floor, opened my door and saw that his door was wide open. That stopped me in my tracks. The hallway smelled wrong. It smelled like wet laundry left in a machine too long, mildew and stagnation, and under that, this faint, acrid, burnt smell like old smoke or ashes from a cremation. I called for him again, louder this time, panic rising in my throat. He stepped out of the bathroom behind me, rubbing his eyes, looking confused. "What?" he mumbled, groggy. I pointed at his door, my hand shaking. "You left it open." "No," he said, waking up instantly. I shut it tight after I came out maybe 10 minutes ago." We turned every light on, flooding the cabin with artificial safety, and checked every inch of the place. Closets, under beds, even behind the shower curtain, waiting to find a drifter or an animal. Nothing. No broken locks, no cracked windows. But near the back door, on the polished wooden floorboards, were damp spots, footprints. Bare, human-sized, more or less. But something was off with the shape. The toes were longer, splayed out unnaturally, or maybe the heel wasn't quite right, too narrow. Just enough to be wrong, just enough to trigger that reptilian part of the brain that says predator. We didn't sleep after that. We just sat by the stove, feeding it wood, watching the fire until it sputtered and went out. Christmas morning arrived with a gray, lifeless dawn. The power cut out before sunrise, plunging us into gray gloom. Jonah cursed, a string of expletives that sounded hollow, and we boiled coffee over the wood stove, the silence stretching between us. We ate cereal out of the box, dry, like kids hiding in a fort. We tried to play it cool, made fun of each other, tried to recapture the camaraderie. I think at one point Jonah joked about Santa being feral, a twisted mountain spirit, but the joke died in the air. I told him I wanted to leave. I didn't care about the money or the time off. He nodded immediately, relief washing over his face. We didn't shower or repack properly. We just shoved things into bags, adrenaline making our movements jerky. I threw on my boots, grabbed the keys, and stepped outside to start the car, desperate to hear the engine turn over. That's when I saw the new tracks, fresh ones, in the snow between the trees. They came from the forest, not from the road or another trail, just straight out of the dense, tangled woods, like someone or something had walked a direct, unwavering line toward the house. And they weren't human. They were too long, stretching nearly 1.5 feet. The shape of the arch was off, like the foot bent in places where bones shouldn't bend, and there were too many marks at the top, like more than 5 toes, digging deep into the snow. I just froze. The car keys were digging into my palm, but I couldn't move my legs. I backed up slowly, my eyes locked on the prints, half expecting something to leap from the tree line. My breath fogged the glass door as I shut it behind me, locking it instinctively. Jonah was in the kitchen, white as a sheet, holding something in his trembling hand. He didn't say anything at first, just handed it to me. It was an ornament, a tiny carved deer's head, but it was wrong. The eyes were hollowed out deep, black pits, and the antlers curled in on themselves like arthritic fingers, fleshy and twisted. Too many of them for symmetry. It looked handmade, whittled from bone or pale wood, a little rough, a little too personal. "I found it inside my boot," he said, his voice barely a whisper. We didn't talk after that. We ran. We threw everything in the car, nearly forgot the keys again in our haste. Jonah backed us down the hill, tires slipping and catching on the ice, scraping the side mirror against a tree and tearing it off. But we didn't stop. We didn't stop when we hit pavement. We just kept going, miles and miles of silence, until we passed a lit-up farmhouse with a wreath on the porch and a dog barking in the yard, a sign of normal life. I called the rental number 2 days later from the safety of my own apartment. It rang once, then clicked to dead silence. I tried again later. Same thing. Number disconnected. Jonah won't talk about it, not even when I bring it up gently after a few drinks. It's like he physically can't hear me, his mind blocking out the memory. But every December since then, usually a week or so before Christmas, I check the snow outside my kitchen window, looking for that single set of barefoot prints, just in case whatever was in those woods decided to follow us home.